Okay, so I see people still coming in. Sorry for the little glitch this morning, if anybody had trouble getting in. But this is welcome to the Brattleboro Literary Festival. This is a very exciting morning for me personally. These are two writers that I'm really excited about. And I'm just going to introduce them and then turn it over to them. Julie Carrick Dalton is a journalist, organic farmer, and novelist. Her work has appeared in publications including the Boston Globe, Inc. magazine, Business Week, The Hollywood Reporter, and Baby Talk. Her short fiction has appeared in various online and print journals, and her debut novel, 4 Degrees, will be published in January 2021. Is that true though, Julie? Is that the old name?
Yeah, that's the old name. That's snuck in there some. It's Waiting for the Night song.
Waiting for the Night. I thought so. So this, anyway, so Waiting for the Night, sorry, Waiting for the Night will be published in January 2021. I am so excited about this. It is followed by a second novel a year later. Julie's fiction has won the William Faulkner Literary Competition, the Writers League of Texas Award, and she was shortlisted for the Caledonia Novel Award. She lives on her farm in New Hampshire with her husband and 4 children. And of this, the Omar El-Akkad, who wrote American War, another great post-apocalyptic or sort of, his post-apocalyptic novel, wrote of her new novel, Julie Carrick Dalton's deftly constructed, urgent yet slow burning debut novel reads like a warning from the front lines of our rapidly deteriorating natural world. So exciting. And our second author today is Andrew Krivak, who is the author of a new novel, The Bear, and 2 previous novels, The Signal Flame, and a Chautauqua Prize finalist, and The Sojourn, a National Book Award finalist, and winner of both the Chautauqua Prize and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for fiction. Andrew lives with his wife and 3 children in Somerville, Massachusetts, and right across the river in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, in the shadow of Mount Monadnock, which inspired much of the landscape in The Bear. And Booklist said of Andrew's new book, Krivak's sentences are polished stones of wonder. The elegiac tone reflects what is lost and what will be lost, an enchantment as if Wendell Berry had reimagined Cormac McCarthy's The Road. So very exciting to have you both here. I am now going to disappear. And I just want to say before I disappear that there is a Q&A function for those of you participating. We really hope you will use it. Ask any questions you have that come to you during the conversation, and then we'll come back in with 5 or 10 minutes left, or depending on how many questions we have, we'll come back in to answer those questions. So Julie and Andrew, welcome, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Oh, there's. So Julie, I wondered, since we've been talking since this morning, I wondered if we should introduce maybe the ways in which we came to start writing our books, and then just, I don't know, read a page or so to give people a sense of that, and then we can, essentially I think it'd be pretty cool to pick up the conversation we'd started this morning about what does it mean to write this type of book, what does it mean to write about the environment, thinking as we were mentioning before, nature as protagonist, etc. So what do you say? Do you want to go first?
Oh, sure, that sounds great. So I'll start off here. This is my debut novel, Waiting for the Night Song. And as Tim mentioned, it was called 4 Degrees for a long time, right up until before publication when we changed the name. And 4 Degrees is talking about the climate, which was why I had previously titled it that, but it's a good intro to a book about climate. I started writing this book 13 years ago, and it wasn't a book about climate when I started writing it. It was about 2 little girls, and it evolved to these women coming back to their hometown decades later, and the town had changed and the climate had changed. And I found myself drawn into writing a story that really engaged climate science, which wasn't how I started writing this book, but it's what the book became. And as you mentioned, climate really becomes a protagonist and a character and a player in this story, and not just the environment, but the climate, like the bigger picture of the whole world and the interconnections between it. And that's what it became. It wasn't how I envisioned the novel when it started. And I'd love to hear the kind of your story about how you started yours.
Yeah, sure. Could you read a page from?
Sure. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Or just like some couple paragraphs, give us a sense of your prose.
Okay, so this is not the opening lines, but it is in the first chapter. It's just a page. And to kind of set you up, my main character, her name is Katie, and she's a forestry researcher, and she is on federal lands that she's not supposed to be on. She's doing some environmental research and she's restricted. She's not allowed to be doing it there, but it's urgent work, so she's doing it anyway. So Katie's backpack grew heavier, compressing her knees and her spine as if she might crumble into the rock under her feet. She forced herself up the final incline. If gravity pulled from the dense fist at the center of the earth, then the higher she pushed herself up the mountain, the further she removed herself from the core, the looser gravity's grip would be. It tugged at her heels and stole oxygen from her lungs. Only on the summits did Katie feel a lightness in her chest. She stood untethered in the rushing wind. Anything seemed possible from the top of a mountain. Katie dropped her pack to the ground. A gust of wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying traces of pine and the reedy flute of a distant hermit thrush. Wind stretched the cloud below her like raw cotton on a comb, allowing the rusty tips of dead pine trees to peek through. She pulled samples of tree bark and pine wedges from her backpack and laid them around her in a semicircle. The invasive beetle she had been hunting for the last 4 days had carved lacy lines into the wood. The pea-sized creatures were killing off the trees and leaving them behind as kindling in the parched woodlands. She stroked the delicate destruction with her finger. The beetle's telltale blue fungus, the color of an autumn sky before sunset, stained the wood. That color meant death to a pine. She held the wedge to her face and inhaled the freshly cut wood. The tang of sap should have rushed in, but dead trees don't bleed, they burn. Smoke blurred the edges from the mountaintops to the west. Mount Griffin rose from the mist, green on the north slope, with a slow burning char on the south. When she finally convinced crews to start thinning the pines, she would salvage a few tree trunks to mill into floorboards for her own home, if she ever stayed still long enough to own a home. The grooves the beetles carved into the wood would feel better under her bare feet than the slick linoleum in her one-bedroom apartment. From the mountaintop, home felt distant, as if it might not be there when she came down. Time moved more slowly in these woods, sliding by like the lazy flow of pine sap. As a child, she used to imagine the world outside slipping away as she leapt from rock to rock through the ferny woods surrounding her home. The pine and beech trees had been her friends. They had guarded her, swallowed her secrets whole. But it was her turn to protect the forest. Silence enveloped this summit, an island of floating stone in the low-hanging clouds. If only time would stop right here, right now. The fires would stall, the beetles would stop their assault, and Katie would remain at the top of the world where she could hide from gravity. She tried to quell the twisting in her gut that reminded her that the fire presented an opportunity. If they proved to be a bigger threat than expected, if her research stopped an inferno, it would transform her career, her future. She did not want that fire, but a small voice inside her called out to the flames, "Come if you dare." So I'll stop there.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, so my novel is called The Bear. So after my second novel, The Signal Flame, came out, I was my wife and I had previously, a few years before that, bought a place up in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, on Thorndike Pond, and I was just a little bit run down after that book and just wondering what I wanted to write, if I even wanted to write anything. And I had just I was just really enjoying being outside in Jaffrey and being in the shadow of Mount Monadnock. And I had remembered that my kids were reminding me that I had told them a story to go to sleep when they were much younger about a talking bear that helped my father find our lost dog, Troy, in the woods. And as I sort of looked at the surrounding in Jaffrey, I mean, you know New Hampshire well. It's not sort of the Rockies. Is very little majestic about it, but it's always ever so surprising in tiny little ways. Like I watched an eagle grab a bass off of Whittemore Island, just in the shallows there, and fly off. Anyway, and so I thought, I really would like to just write something that really focuses on the environment. And we've discussed this before. I wondered about nature as a protagonist. In The Signal Flame, I really got a handle on writing about nature. And the nature I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I just wanted to keep going back there. And so initially the book was a story about a man and his daughter just living off the land, away from a lot of people. And I was out fishing one day in the pond, and I was having troubles with the narrative, trying to figure out what's going to drive it from the middle section. And the father and daughter are separated. How do they get back together? Usual narrative problems. And I just was looking out at the mountain and thinking, what's this place going to be like when the last two are here? And I thought, that's it. And I rode back to my writing table, and I I wrote this first two paragraphs, and I'll read them now. And so then I started chipping away then at the book, and knowing right from the start that these were the last two, it all of a sudden had to become a book about the environment and a book about climate change. I don't talk at all about what could have possibly created that, because it was much more important for me for these two characters to be right now in the world where they lived, which is the last two people living in the shadow of Mount Monadnock. And so, by the way, folks, oh, Julie, you got your tag up there. Anyway,
oh yeah,
it was me a while ago.
yeah, we were both named Andrew for a few minutes.
The bear. The last two were a girl and her father who lived along the old eastern range on the side of a mountain they called the mountain that stands alone. The man had come there with a woman when they were young and built a house out of timber, stones pulled from the ground and mortar they made with a mix of mud and sand. It was set halfway up the mountain slope and looked out onto a lake ringed with birch trees and blueberry bushes that ripened in summer with great bunches of fruit the girl and her father would pick as the two floated along the shore in a canoe. From a small window in front of the house, the glass, a gift the woman's parents had given to her after having received it themselves from the generation before, so precious a thing had it become as the skill for making it was lost and forgotten. The girl could see eagles catching fish in the shallows of an island that rose from the middle of the lake, and hear the cries of loons in the morning while her breakfast cooked over a hearth fire. In winter, the snows began not long after the autumn equinox and still visited the mountain months after the spring. Storms lasted for days and weeks at a time, drifts climbing up against the house and burying paths as deep as some trees grew high. Often the man had to wade for firewood or trudge out to his tool shed at the edge of the forest with a rope tied around his waist. But when the wind settled, the skies cleared, and the low sun shone again, the man would wrap the young girl warm and tight in a pack, walk out into the stillness of winter, and float on snowshoes made of ash limbs and rawhide down to the frozen lake, where the two would spend the day fishing for trout and perch through the ice. Snow covered so much of the girl's world from mountaintop to lake that for almost half the year, all she could see when she looked out that window was a landscape at rest beneath a blanket of white. And yet, no matter how long winter lasted, spring followed, its arrival soft and somehow surprising, like the notes of birdsong upon waking or the tap of water slipping in a droplet from a branch to the ground. As the snow melted, black rocks, gray lichen, and brown leaf cover emerged from the once uniform palette of the forest floor, and the thin silvery outlines of trees began to brighten with leaves of green against the groupings of hemlock and pine. Those were the days when the girl left the house in the morning with her father and studied the new world that pushed up from the dirt of the forest and emerged from the water at the edge of the lake. Days in which she lay on the ground beneath a warm sun and wondered if world and time itself were like the hawk and eagle soaring above her in long arcs she knew were only part of their flight, for they must have begun and returned to some place as of yet unseen by her, someplace as of yet unknown.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So there, we find ourselves in the environment.
Yeah, and I think from what you and I were talking about this morning about nature as a protagonist, and I think both of these examples we started off with are they're very set in nature, and nature is interacting with our characters. But I also am kind of struck that we're both writing about New Hampshire, and that your setting feels very familiar to me, even though it's in this future, and I suspect mine might feel familiar to you. And yeah, and it felt, I think this is a great pairing of books, and I didn't realize how well they were going to play off each other. And I like the way that those two passages work together.
Yeah, and one thing I thought a lot about is this notion of post-apocalyptic fiction, and I think the idea of the post-apocalypse, it has to it generically comes with the big explosions and the destruction and everything. And I don't know about you, but I really wanted to get away from that. I was actually imagining a kind of the other side of Eden. Like I think humans might be in trouble, but I think nature is going to be just fine. I think we're a tiny little blip, and we have I mentioned this too, this notion of hubris. We have a sort of human hubris to think that we're at the top of it all. Are we really? So
Yeah.
if and not that I do have hope for humanity, but I still think that at the same time, understanding that place we have. So this notion of this novel about the end times, apocalypse, just meaning the uncovering. To me, it was better served, and it sounds like this for you too, just better served in a more beautiful way. Like, I think, I'm convinced those end times for humans could be quite spectacular and beautiful in nature, right? So anyway.
Well, whatever moment we're in, that's the moment we're in. And there's going to be beauty and there's going to be awe and wonder and nature in all of those moments. And I think a lot of the reason people are drawn, at least for me, why I'm drawn to engaging the climate and climate science is kind of a grieving for a future that I don't know what it's going to look like.
Right.
And looking at the things around me that maybe won't be here. And I guess it's kind of like anticipating grief that hasn't happened, or grieving for things I haven't lost yet. And it makes me stop and look a little closer at the things that are still here. And I see that in your writing, that your character is looking at what's around them and seeing beauty in it. But I also sense from you as the writer, you're cherishing the beauty in the world around you right now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I love that notion that you said of this is it. This is right now. This is when we have to write. One thing I have been talking to other folks about is I think that a hallmark of, let's call it eco-fiction, right? Even if that's a thing, right? But the hallmark about writing about nature is going to be even more so this being right here, right now. And I've begun sort of in my own writing to this campaign against what I call against interiority. No rhetorical questions. Characters have to look out. If they're not, there's a thought process, but in my estimate, in my world, a lot more decision making gets done at a good level when you look out at what's in front of you and you live entirely in the now. And so I really wanted the girl and the father to mirror that, because how else are you gonna? They are just surviving day to day. I want it to be a beautiful life. But underneath that, there's there's a real sort of tension. You have to live now in order to get by, So. Anyway.
And I think there's a kind of coming from a different perspective. My character, main character, Katie, is trying to fight it in a lot of ways. Like
that's interesting. Yeah.
There's the title "Waiting for the Night Song" refers to a bird song, that a bird that's going extinct, and it plays in the background of the whole novel, of her grieving for this bird that's becoming extinct. And she is trying to fight nature. And I think that there's she's not doing anything actively to fight it, but she isn't ready to give in to what's happening. And I think that evolves through the book. But I think that there's a lot of different approaches to writing climate fiction that there's the post-apocalyptic, there's the disaster stories. And then there's a lot of really great contemporary, like right now, like I'm thinking like Robin MacArthur's book, Heart Spring Mountain. I think she's a Vermont writer, I believe, which is a really beautiful, kind of eco-fiction look at the moment we're in right now. And it gives me hope seeing all these different types of stories and people coming at writing this eco-fiction or climate fiction or whatever we want to call it. There's so many approaches, but the common theme I'm seeing is this like sliver of hope. However we come at it, there's like an element of hope.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that. Extinction, right? You have a species that's on the verge of extinction. I toyed with humanity actually going extinct, right? Would it ruin the book for you if you said is the extinction inevitable for this species?
It's not.
Oh, no. Okay.
This doesn't mess anything up for this, giving away anything in the story, but it's a bird whose habitat is being destroyed in the Caribbean, that it migrates from deforestation and hurricanes. This is a real bird. It's called a Bicknell's thrush, and every year it comes back to New England in smaller numbers. And so it's not gone, but it's moving further north, and there's fewer sightings of it. And so it's like this gradual loss and this kind of grieving for a future when it might not be here.
Right.
So I think it's like a process, and this idea of anticipatory grief, I think we see in a lot of fiction.
So how did you write hope into this novel?
I don't know. I think I'm a hopeful person in general. And I derive a lot of joy from nature, just from being in it, from walking in it, from, and reading other stories about it. And I have a really hard time not finding hope. I mean, I'm not not in a sugar-coated way. Like, I read a lot of nonfiction about climate science, and there's some really beautiful narrative work about, climate right now. And that's real, and the facts are real. And you could look at them with a completely pessimistic lens, and that would be fair, and it would be, or wouldn't be unreasonable. But I also think that, as a human, I think I'm driven to find moments of hope. How about you?
Well, I wanted to say more like what at the level of the nuts and bolts of writing and storytelling, do you use language as a vehicle for hope? Does the narrative turn on I guess that's what I'm curious about with your novel, which I can't wait to read, precisely for this reason, is because I think hope, as writers, we can, there's ways in which the language is it's our keyboard, and we
Yeah.
get to play the song, right? And so do we play it? What key do you choose? Is a major key, a minor key? And sometimes minor keys are beautiful as well, and can be hopeful in that sort of resolution. So I just wondered about, if you think about it at the level of composition, if you think about it in as you were writing the book, where do you place your hope?
Definitely in language. I think that my character's voice sounds a little different when she's out in nature,
Cool,
and
yeah,
she's
yeah.
connected to nature. And I think her hope comes out when she's, in the world, not with other people necessarily.
Yeah.
And I think the underlying hope in the book is her trying to communicate with other people the hope and the fears she has as a scientist.
Yeah.
And in my book, which is a very contemporary, it's not a named date, because I didn't want to anchor it or, tether it to a specific moment in time, but it's contemporary. But, she's battling a lot of the things we are now of a climate denialist government, which I don't define in my book, but she's bumping up against denialism and how to communicate her hope and her vision for the future. So yeah, so it's based in language, but I think it's also like an undercurrent. It's not on the surface level of what I'm writing.
Yeah, no, I like that. That sounds right to me. Yeah, where are we?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. But I think that there's, when I look at the wide variety of novels that are coming out right now that have climate, and they're all over the place. I don't know if you've seen Migrations, which came out this summer from Charlotte McConaughey.
Yeah, I've heard it. I heard of it. Yes, I have not.
It's a beautiful book that I highly recommend, and it really tackles this idea of like anticipating grief of animals that don't exist in her future world that she writes about.
Yeah.
And it's a very beautiful story that if I described it to you, it might sound bleak and hopeless, but it's not. It's a beautiful story that's infused with hope in moments you don't expect to find it. And I think that's what the challenge is right now, maybe finding hope and ways to keep moving forward, but not sugarcoating things, because that doesn't help. That doesn't really help anybody to pretend things are better than they are.
Right. I mean, so it's not ruining anything to say that there are no humans left at the end of my novel, from beginning with the last two. But it's more a story about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And again, to go back, that we started with this idea of nature as a protagonist. What if we're selling ourselves short by believing that we're the only ones who tell stories? And I've not even read Richard Powers' The Overstory yet. I have to read that book, right? And it made me think about, maybe that's the way in which nature injects the hope. Nature is a lot more of hope. And so really pivoting that perspective, when there's nobody left, and you still have an environment, who tells the story? I mean, to me, that was a driving question as I was writing my novel, thinking like, okay, if this is the case, then who tells the story of the bear?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I thought that was really something that I've begun to think about in a larger general way, like who tells the story? And I think if as humans we think about that, it all becomes a cautionary tale, and it always makes me stop and think like, wow, okay, and then start to look closer and look at the ways in which things can go badly, filled with grief, or maybe there's some small thing we can do. You and I talked earlier about the small act. I love that, the ways in which the small things just add up in ways that maybe we can't in our context understand. But if we're committed to it, if we stick to it, that has a cumulative effect throughout, exponentially even. So.
Yeah, and talking about the overstory, which I know you said you want to read, one of the things that I think that you particularly are going to love about it is the idea of time.
Oh yeah.
Is different with different species, with the earth itself. Like, that idea of, us seeing ants moving on the ground, moving really fast, and it seems like a little microcosm. The forest.
I love ants, by the way, but go ahead.
I'm a big insect fan. All my books feature insects as a primary character in the book, so we can talk about that offline another day. But and in the overstory, the forest as an entity is like this kind of sentient, knowledge-filled entity. We are the ants that are moving really slow and really fast on the ground. And for the mountains, the forest seems to be moving fast. So it has this element of like nature having this sentience about it, and that we aren't all operating on the same plane.
Yeah.
I think that you'll really like that, talking about that idea of nature having its own, or the earth having its own life force, that there's, different visions of whose story this is.
So maybe what's happening, and maybe precisely this panel and this other fiction, maybe it was just the sort of, I don't know, is it a gestalt? There's something in the zeitgeist, that people are turning to this and thinking, wow, that's a way that I could try to understand these questions I've had, or writers thinking I could ask the question that way. I could discuss storytelling in this way. And it's probably no surprise, in fact, that we collectively are coming up with at least places where tangentially we touch and are on the same page, literally and figuratively too.
Yeah, and so many writers are coming at it from different perspectives. Like, your story has like a fable kind of feeling to it.
Yeah, I'd say the use of the word fable is correct. Yeah.
And then there's, there's fantastical stories that have these kind of, mythology, or some really beautiful books with indigenous stories that kind of come into our reality right now. I'm thinking of the Lightning Trails out by Rebecca Roanhorse. I believe that's the name of the book. I hope I didn't get that wrong, but it's a really beautiful book. But it's all these different approaches to climate and how different people here, want to tell their story and connect to it. But I think it all comes back to that idea of, we connect to nature in different ways, and,
Yeah, exactly.
and we see it differently, but maybe we're not the protagonist.
Yeah, right. I mean, I always think I studied classics as an undergrad. I had to study Greek and read all those guys. And I'm always reminding myself that, the word mythos is Aristotle's word for action, when he says that action is what drives all tragedy, or any story really. And this notion of myth as being something that's wrong, or that's not right, or fake, is just, I think, is wrong. And, the Greeks understood myth as an initiation into a mystery. And those mysteries unfolded through storytelling and through drama and the tragedies that they wrote. So I love the idea of people writing myths right now, because that's really where it's at,
I don't know if you've read Gun Island by Amitav Ghosh.
No,
I'm a huge Yes, I'm a huge fan of his. I'm kind of a Amitav Ghosh fangirl. But in Gun Island, he takes a myth and brings it into the present, and it always is bordering on, is the myth real, or is it just a perceived connections between what's happening in the real world and the myth? And it's a really beautiful way to tell a story. But it's again, bringing these old stories into our present world, and in your case, into the our future world.
Yeah. I'm a huge Cormac McCarthy fan, and I've always loved the use of language to get that it's really a world. You read a word out of a McCarthy novel, and you think, wow, where does that come from? And it comes from our own language. It's just not used a lot, and so there's a kind of mythical quality to that style of language that lets him write about the early 19th century or some event in the future, but both of them having this kind of gravitas of of myth, I think is the word.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's a word that he's found that tells the story in the best, that's part of the story in the best way possible. It's the best possible word for that moment, which is what I just love about McCarthy.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what are you reading right now or looking forward to that's kind of inspiring you?
Well, so I had been finishing a lot of nonfiction for my last novel. I just submitted revisions for my next novel to my agent to get out there. And I think this is going out live now. Well, we'll see. Anyway, I'm sure no one's going to care. But so I was finishing up reading a lot of books about the French and the Viet Minh pre-Vietnam, when it was Indochina and the French and the Viet Minh were battling. Bernard Falls, Street with No Joy, and Hell in a Very Small Place. A fantastic writer, journalist who died in Vietnam, actually killed by a landmine in '67, I believe, on patrol with some Marines. And also, I am currently reading Salar Abdo's novel, Out of Mesopotamia, Chelsea Beaker's novel, Godshot, and the Nick Adams stories. Anyway, it's fun.
Good stuff.
So that's what I'm back to fiction. Yeah, after all that nonfiction. So
yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there. Yeah, I just picked up on it, grab it and hold it up for you if I can reach it. But I just got, I don't know if you've seen this book. It's called All We Can Save. It's a collection. I think you'd love it. It's a collection of essays, poems, and narratives all about climate. And it's spectacular. And it has a wide range of tone and viewpoints and perspectives, and they're all in small pieces. And it's a really great companion piece to me as I'm writing fiction. This is all poetry and nonfiction, but
nice, yeah, poetry's always on my shelf read. I just Robert Hass's Summer Snow is my favorite book of 2020. Galway Cannell's collected poems is already beat up on my shelf.
Yeah, I'm also really looking forward to The New Wilderness. And I think Diane Cook, I believe, is a panelist at this festival. But I think it's a book you might enjoy too. It also has that kind of climate future element. And it has a really interesting framework. And I have it, I own it, and I haven't quite gotten to it yet.
Do you find that, Tim? I want to ask her one more question. Do you find that when you're writing, that you have to, at a certain point, you avoid other writers that are in a similar vein or genres, like just to sort of like get out of my head kind of thing? Are you there with that or not?
I am deep into that, actually. There's a book, I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce this author's name. I'm going to say it and I apologize. And it's Maha Lunde, who wrote The History of Bees. And I hope I didn't get that wrong, but it's a beautiful book. And my next book, which I'm also finishing up, it's due into my agent in 13 days, not that I'm counting, but it's about bees, and it's a near future story about an unexpected event that precipitates the spontaneous collapse of the pollinator population.
You mentioned that.
And so this book that I started reading, it was about bees. I'm like, bees, I love bees and I like this author, so I'm going to start reading the book. And it instantly, there's an element of it that I, in my mind, think is going in a similar direction of something that my book wanted to do. So I put the book down and I was like, I'm not touching this book because I don't want to know what this author did. I don't want to be influenced by it in either direction. I want my story to be my story that I need to tell. And then I will go back and read this book because there's things about it that are really attractive to me that I want to read. But anything that I feel is too close to where I'm going with my story, I don't want to read it while I'm writing.
Yeah, that's good. Funny story like this. So I was fascinated by beelining, finding hives in the forest, and I know that there's some around Old Monadnock. So, and you get about a mile or two to check these out, right? You must know about this. I found out that my neighbor down the road has hives.
I keep beehives. My bees don't.
Right?
Yeah,
but it works.
I'm obsessed.
A really great hive.
I feel like we should let Tim back into the conversation.
Yeah, I only want to come back in because we do have a couple of questions, but this is such a fascinating conversation, you guys. It's really, really, really interesting. I was fascinated by everything that you talked about, but this idea of joy, of hope, and hope. And I think that, one thing that I would point out is that like hope in fiction is rare, and it only coexists when there's darkness. And I think that both of your books have an element of darkness. You need both. And I think you guys understand that. And that to me is kind of special and rare. And
great. Don't fear the darkness.
Yeah.
You need it. You need it. If you think of Tolstoy, I mean, Tolstoy wrote very dark books, but he was also able to capture the joy and the hope of living, and because he had this darkness to offset it. Anyway, that fascinating. The other thing is, and this actually comes to the first of our questions. This is from Nancy Johnson. That this idea of nature as an aspect of the writing craft, and also this idea that you guys discussed, and also this idea of storytelling's role. And this is what Nancy's getting at. What's storytelling's role in the current environmental crisis? She says, both of your books have entered the world at a time of greater climate change awareness. How do your books contribute to today's conversation without being didactic?
That's a great question. Little shout out to Nancy Johnson. I know Nancy, she has a book coming out called The Kindest Lie, which you should all keep on your radar as well. I think, when you read journalism or nonfiction about climate science, you can be really bogged down in the numbers and the reality, and you can tell a very dark story, and you could present it that way. And that's a fair assessment of it. But I think a novelist or a fiction writer can find cracks that kind of break open the data and the charts and the science and find those moments of joy. And there's like in New England, we're New Englanders here, and we're going to lose maple trees eventually in New England as the climate's changing, and that's a real loss. But what's coming in, and what do we still have? And it makes me cherish my maple trees even more. Every time I see a maple tree, flame up in the fall, I love that tree all the more, because I'm afraid of losing it. So I think you can infuse hope in the data where the data itself might not present hope. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I just think that the novelist is presenting a kind of artistry, a love. The journalism is out there, and the articles are scary, and there are days when I just think there's not a chance we're turning it back. But then, I think that you take a book like Julie's or any, Richard Powers' Over Stories, and you see the way in which somebody does look at the world and say, there's a story here. I think that's all you can do, because as humans, what is the connectivity, the connective tissue, but love? And what if that connective tissue also, through the hands of the novelist, the poet, extended to nature as well? Quickly, Tim, last night I watched My Teacher, the Octopus, or My Octopus Teacher. Highly recommend everybody. Craig Foster, South African filmmaker, unbelievable, talking about the connectivity between humans and nature. That's it. Just all about love.
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound like a tree hugger. I'm people who know me.
It's great. So one further question, this is more of a general sort of writerly question from Joanne Rhodes, who says, when you read others, do you see their work through the lens of a writer? So that's interesting. So when you're reading books, are you reading them for how for approaches for how you might write books, or analyzing them through the lens of the craft? I think, is that what she's asking? I think that might be what she's asking.
I would say I can appreciate craft in other people's books, and sometimes I'm just blown away and I put the book down because I think I can never do that. But what I really pick a book up for is for story, and to enjoy it, and to be immersed in something that maybe I don't know about, or a character I want to know more about. So I want to get lost in a book, and I don't want to be thinking about the other writer's craft. And maybe I will reflect on it after I read it, but I don't find myself, as I'm reading, breaking down the craft of another novel. I just want to get lost in it, which is what I hope somebody will do in my book one day.
Yeah, I'd have to say the same. I mean, I think it's a professional hazard, right, Julie? That you start to think, well, I wouldn't have written it that way. But I think that's something that a writer really has to back off on, is that notion of I wouldn't have written it this way. I think too many reviewers do that. That's not the way I would have written the book. I think that it really is all about the story and getting lost in it. And so yeah, I do the exact same thing. A work as different as Bernard Fall's Street Without Joy, which is just about Indochina, a fantastic book, and Salar Abdo's novel Out of Mesopotamia. Two different writers from two different generations, and each beautiful in the way that the story unfolds. So
great. We're getting a note here from Susan Middleton, who says, and you can find My Octopus Teacher on Netflix and perhaps streaming services too.
Netflix, yes.
That sounds good. I have a
Well,
lot of time on my hands these days, so I think I'll probably check that out.
well, you guys, it has been such an incredible pleasure and honor to have you here at the Brattleboro Literary Festival. I really think your books are, both your books are great contributions to the exact conversation that we've been discussing. And I want to just make sure that we get the name of Julie's book right, because I said it wrong at the very beginning, which coming out of January of 2021, Waiting for the Night Song, which is a great title, Waiting for the Night Song, and Andrew Krivak's The Bear. And after, if you stay tuned in just a minute, we're going to have a splash page that has links to get to how you can buy the book on bookshop.org, and also make a contribution to the Brattleboro Literary Festival. So once again, you guys, it's just so great to hear you talk. Thank you so much for coming.
Tim.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Tim.
See you on the mountain, Tim.
Well, let's hope so. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good night, or good day, Julie.
Nice chatting with you.
We'll talk to you later, okay? All right. Bye-bye.